A sister and her sister-in-law went to the farm early in the morning. Each of them wore 2 silver plaits around the neck. When they got to the farm, the sister-in-law told the sister to go pick cucumbers from the top of the hill, and the sister-in-law herself will go pick cucumbers from the bottom of the hill. The sister did as she was told and went up the hill to pick cucumbers. Once her back basket was filled with cucumbers, she returned to the spot where she was directed to go uphill and waited. After 10 minutes of silence, she called downhill to her sister-in-law. "Sister-in-law, is your back basket full yet? If it's full, come up and let's go home." But there was no reply. She called a few more times, yet there was still no reply. Fearing something had gone wrong, she quickly set her back basket down and rushed downhill. When she reached downhill, her sister-in-law was nowhere in sight, but next to a tree stump was her back basket filled with cucumbers. Next to her sister-in-law's back basket was one of her silver plates. She scanned the surrounding area again, checking to see if there had been any struggles within the area, but noticed no difference. There was a small stream downhill, so the sister thought to herself that maybe her sister-in-law went down to the river after picking cucumbers to wash her hands. The sister decided to go down to the river to look for her, but after about 10 steps forward, the sister saw the other silver plate. Her heart started racing, but she quietly told herself to be brave and ran all the way down to the river. Once she reached the river, she called out to her sister-in-law again, and once again, there was no reply. Now she was really scared, so she turned back and started running up the hill, grabbing both her sister-in-law's silver plates. When she reached home, she told her parents and Lee, the brother that married her sister-in-law, what had happened. Lee quickly went and gathered about 10 men in town to go look for his wife. Each man carried guns and knives in their hands. They went to the area and started the search and rescue. However, after a whole day of searching, there was still no sign of his lost wife. Night started covering the hills. A couple of men started saying, "It's getting dark, and we can't find any sign of her. So let's go home and return back tomorrow to look again." Crying, Lee replied, "No, we are men here with knives and guns. There is nothing to fear. We should continue this search till we find my wife." Although most of the men wanted to leave because they were starting to feel chills, they felt bad for Lee, so they decided to continue the search with him. The deeper they went into the woods looking for his wife, the more chills they started feeling. With each chill, goosebumps started rising on their fleshes, and their heartbeats started racing. About 10 minutes later, Lee heard his wife's voice echoing in the air saying, "I'm over here. Come over here." Lee turned to the rest of the men and told them what he heard. All the men now stopped dead in their tracks and glanced at each other. They shook their heads and replied, "No, we did not hear anything." Before Lee could say anything else, he heard his wife's voice calling him again. He looked towards where his wife's voice was echoing from and pointed ahead. "My wife is calling me from ahead, so we are going to move ahead." Before anyone could stop Lee, he pushed on forward, hearts racing faster and fear beaming on all the men's faces. They trailed closely after Lee. 5 minutes later, everyone, including Lee, stopped dead in their tracks again. For this time they all heard his wife's voice ranging in the air. One of the men noticed the voice was too close to them, so he quickly said, "Your wife sounds very nearby. Let's get our guns ready." Everyone started pulling bullets out of their pockets and stuffing it in their guns. As Lee reached into his pockets for his bullets, he pulled out his wife's ring. His heart shook with chills as he said quietly, "This is my wife's ring. She wore it this morning. How did it get into my pocket?" Upon hearing this, everyone now shook with fear of what was going on, but they pushed forward. However, after 3 to 4 steps, they saw on the ground in front of them Lee's wife's dead body, which was torn and eaten all by something. The only parts left were the head connected to half her neck and left shoulder to her arm. One of the men turned to Lee and said, "Now that we have found your wife's body, it's too dark to do anything. So let's cut down some wood and bamboo to make a tree house above ground to rest. When morning calls, we will take your wife's body home for burial. If not, We will bury her here tomorrow morning because her body is not a good sight to bring into town anymore anyway. Everyone agreed with the man. So everyone quickly helped chop down trees and bamboo. And by 11:30, they managed to make 3 tree houses. Once everyone was up in each tree house, they could still look clearly down at Lee's wife's body on the ground. By now it was around 12:40 and Lee's wife's head started turning to look at everyone and smiling at them, even though they were all men. Seeing this sight made them feel lifeless. After that, she turned and smiled at everyone, and then it turned back to its dead position and laid still again. Now the man that told them all to make the treehouse directed that no one is allowed to go to sleep. They are all going to stay awake and see what's going to happen next. An hour later, she turned her head again and smiled at them. This time, her hand raised up as if she was pointing to them. Some of the men peed in their pants without shame. Another man in the group thought for a while and said, "It looks like she is trying to tell someone or something that we are up here." Once those words were out, everyone started shooting guns down below around her motionless body. By 4 in the morning, they climbed down and divided the men into 2 groups. A group to dig his wife's grave and a group to guard the surroundings. They managed to bury her half-body. Before leaving, Lee kneeled in front of his wife's grave and cried, "I loved you so much when you were alive. Why did you treat me so nasty now that you are gone? Is it because there is something or someone I cannot see forcing you to do this to me? No matter what, even though you scared me like this, I will love you always. Our life together will end this way. Sorry I'm not able to take you home with me." After that, everyone came home and the story of his wife echoed throughout town. This story was first told by one of the men that went with Lee that day, and since then, it has been passed down generations after generations. While back in Laos, my mom was still a kid about the age of 9. She and some of her cousins around the same age went to the farm to sleep there for the night until they finished whatever they were doing in the garden. They went to the farm in the morning, and when they reached the farm, it was already in the afternoon around 5 p.m. There were 4 girls, including my mom, and 2 brothers. The 2 brothers were a bit older. One was around 15-year-old, and the other one was 14. That night they ate dinner and prepared for the next morning. My mom and her cousin went to get some wood to make a fire just in case they might need to make more fire during the night. It was getting late and my mom and the cousin were still not asleep yet. They all were just sitting on the bed and listening to the rain. Luckily, my mom's cousin's hut was built just like a house with a door and also with strong wood instead of leaves. They made the fire in the middle of the farm hut, and then they all decided to go and sit around the fire. My mom told me that she noticed her other cousin hadn't been moving around and they stayed silent. They all were just sitting very close to the fire and stared straight to one side of the wall. She then turned and looked at the wall. She was so shocked and scared that she just couldn't talk or turn and look at her cousin. What they all saw made them all speechless. On the wall, it had a hole about a quarter of a person's face. They didn't know who it was. My mom told me they saw on the other side of the hole was a lady or a man. They didn't even know if it was a male or female because it was covered in blood and in some green rotten thing. It was trying to poke its face against the hole. One eye was rotting and smelled so bad. It kept on smiling at them and staring at them with its long tongue hanging out. They were so scared they kept on screaming. Every time they screamed, the ghost would copy them. It would run around the house and come back to the hole and look at them. Every time it ran around and came back to the hole and made faces at them, they would scream. My mom and her cousin were too scared to go outside. They were too scared to stay inside as well. They all were just sitting in the middle around the fire and hugged each other. The 2 boys were also horrified but didn't scream. Luckily, there was a family at their farmhouse close to my mom's cousin's hut. The next door neighbor at the farm heard them scream and yell. He told his wife to stay with the kids, and he was going to check it out. He got his gun and ran to where my mom was. When he reached the hut, he saw that there was a Hmong lady with long hair and Hmong clothes running around the hut. He let out 2 shots and the ghost ran away with a scream. He called out to my mom and them to come out before he leaves. They all were so scared that they just opened the door and ran straight to him. They all ran back with him to his hut. Next day they went and checked, and all they saw was just a trail of rotten liquid dripped throughout the house from the ghost. She must have gotten shot. And the trail went from the house down to the edge of the forest. My older sister was born about 28 years ago when my parents were still in Laos, in the village that they were living in at that time. Villagers were looking for gold in the river banks nearby. I heard my grandfather say that a villager promised the guardian of the river a human sacrifice for gold. One day my mother took my sister to bathe in the river. Out of nowhere, my mother saw a streak of blood on her forehead. My sister wasn't hurt or anything. My mother quickly washed it away and went back home. She didn't think much of it though. Not too long after that, my parents had a big argument. My father back then liked to go out to drink with his friends and would leave my mother to fend for the family. With that argument, my father angrily slashed the front door with his knife. He did it out of anger and he said some hurtful words to my mother. A few days later, my sister became sick. My parents went and asked an uncle to bring their traditional medicine for her. He gave my sister everything and it wasn't helping. She was getting sicker by the days. My uncle told my parents to seek a shaman because he couldn't help them. My sister was marked by a ghost, and along with my dad slashing the front door out of anger, he gave the ghost permission to come take my sister. The house spirits who were supposed to protect them were cut down and couldn't help. Within a short period of time, my sister passed away. My grandfather said that it was the river guardian spirit owner that took my sister away. The villager who made the promise didn't keep his promise and fled the village. And in return, many other villagers paid for his consequences. My mother was really upset, but eventually she had me and my siblings. This story wasn't told to us because my mom didn't want to scare us. But about 9 years ago, while I was sitting in my room, my younger sister came crying to me. She said that while she was in the bathroom, out of nowhere a random drop of blood fell on her arm. It wasn't a small drop, it was quite big. She washed it off quickly but got really scared because she had seen a movie where a man randomly found a drop of blood on him and was soon later taken away by a water dragon spirit. I asked her if it was just her nose bleeding or if she scratched herself, but she was serious that the blood appeared out of nowhere. We quickly told my mother, and that was when she told us the story of our older sister. She urgently got my grandfather to come do a ritual calling for my sister. My grandfather cut up a paper figure to trade for my sister's spirit. He changed my sister's Hmong name and put leaves up around our house to keep bad spirits away. We used to go for family barbecue by a river, and from there, a water dragon spirit took a liking to my sister. So now whenever I go out near rivers or oceans, I don't sing nor talk to myself anymore. According to the elders, it's not good to sing or talk highly about yourself because it'll attract spirits. So the story begins when my father was back in Laos. My grandparents and my father were at the farm when the sun was starting to set and it was getting dark. They all packed up ready to leave when my dad insisted on going over to the next village to court girls. My grandmother warned my father that an aunt was just recently buried along the path in which they were going to take home, and that it'll be dark soon, but my father was filled with confidence. It was the war times, so my father had an assault rifle and 2 grenades on him. He said, "It'll be all right. I got a gun. If I see any ghosts, I'll just shoot them." My grandparents headed home while my father headed in the other direction towards a nearby village. Night eventually fell throughout the sky, and my father began to walk home. He didn't have a flashlight and was guided by the light of the full moon. He was walking down the path surrounded by trees when he heard giggling. It came from behind him. My father looked behind him, but no one was there. Then the giggling was heard from his right. He looked and what he saw made his skin crawl. There at the side of the road, beneath a big tree, was the freshly dug grave. The mound of dirt was high above the ground, and sitting on it there with its feet dangling down was the deceased aunt. just bobbing its head around. She was in dirty Hmong clothes. The white dress was stained brown, and her hair was covered in dirt. Her skin was torn and pale. It looked as if she had clawed herself out from her very own grave. My father froze in terror as the ant giggled like a child on top of the tree branch. My father screamed and shot at the ghost. It instantly disappeared as the first shot was fired. The hysterical laughter was heard loudly in every direction. My father ran down the path. Not looking back, he ran and ran until the laughter slowly died out. Then he stopped to catch his breath and continued walking. Not long after he started walking, he heard it again, except now it was a mix of laughter and hissing. He looked up and saw the auntie sitting on top of the tallest branch on a tree. He watched as the ghost started to float up. Its body soon was in front of the full moon with the moonlight drawing its figure, catching every strand of hair. The ghost then started screaming despite its cold smile as its head began to turn. The head of the auntie turned one full circle before snapping back into place. This time, the teeth of the ghost were clearly seen, sharp and long as it lunged at my father. My father shouted and shot at it. The ghost disappeared only to be seen back on the branch. My father pulled out a grenade and threw it into the tree. The grenade exploded as the ghost was seen across the road under a different tree. My father pulled out his last grenade and tossed it at the tree. He began to run as the grenade exploded. The ghost was obviously very much alive as her laughter faded behind my father. My father got home and told my grandparents everything. They instantly told a shaman the next day. And here's what the shaman said. The spirit of your aunt told me it wanted to test you. Since you were so confident, she was having so much fun until you yelled at her twice. Which were the two grenades? My grandma lectured my father, of course.